Okay, hypersensitivity type 1. So allergy. Okay, these are immediate reactions. Okay, so we already know how the humoral system works. So you have your antigen, which in this case is the allergen. So this antigen, could be pollen, it could be, whatever, a peanut or whatever. So something you ate, something you breathed in or whatever. So we already know, that what happens, we get, we get the CD4 cell, which is the helper cell, binds to, the B cell takes up the antigen. So we have the helper cell, the antigen binds to the B cell, the helper cell goes with the B cell and activates it and creates antibodies. So in this case, it's going to create IgE antibodies. And the IgE antibodies, once it goes through its clonal expansion and does all that, it's got a bunch of these antibodies floating around. And what they do is they end up, the body creates basophils. And because the initial reaction, you've got these basophils have histamine and increase inflammation. So always the first time you're exposed to it, you may get a little bit of an issue, but it's usually not that bad. So what happens is once we get these basophils in there, they go into the tissues and better make it this color. So we get the basophils, they go into the tissues, and what happens to them? They become mast cells. Once they're in the tissues. And remember, basophils have these big granules. These are granulocytes. And basically they have these little, bunches of these huge, make this a different color just to kind of show. So big old granules in here. And full of these granules that are histamines. And what happens is these IgE antibodies come and they bind to the plasma membrane of these mast cells. So let's just say it looks like this. Let's just say the antibodies look like that. And that's where the antigen would go, which is here. Okay. So you've now built up these mast cells, which aren't doing anything when you first get on this first exposure. You're making these mast cells. These mast cells are picking up these antibodies that are being created by your exposure, and they just kind of hang out. So this is the first exposure. And these things get formed and they kind of hang out in the tissues and they sort of stay there. So when you get exposed again, what happens is, again, these, when you get exposed again, you get the antigen, it goes through all of that, it makes these IgE antibodies, and what happens is the antibodies that get formed, again, on the second exposure, you get antibodies. Let me make more like the ones that are there. So the antibodies are here. And let's say you have it finds its antigen, and they're floating around, they grab the antigen, and what happens is if they end up getting near the mast cell, then it will bind with one of its antibodies there. So then they'll have like two. So then it will look like that. So you'll have this what's called cross-linking. Of the antigen. And if that happens on the mast cell, then that will trigger this mast cell to barf out all of those granules. So it will end up sending out all these granules. So it sends all this histamine out into the body, and it causes histamine, the release of histamine what does that do? Well, it causes sorry, I can't spell at all. It causes vasodilation. And this is systemic. It causes mass vasodilation. I cannot spell tonight. I am having trouble with that. Let me try this one last time here. I can't talk and spell at the same time. Vasodilation. Okay, good. Causes vasodilation, increased vessel permeability, and bronchoconstriction. So from this, the symptoms you're going to get are going to be allergic rhinitis. You can get atopic dermatitis, like a rash. Asthmatic symptoms, so asthma, wheezing and trouble breathing, and eventually you can get into anaphylactic shock, because basically your vessels are dilating and your blood stops moving. Okay, so that gets you into shock. So that's where you need some kind of antihistamine, a corticosteroid, or even epinephrine, because epinephrine is a systemic vasoconstrictor. So corticosteroids will decrease the inflammation and inflammatory aspects. Antihistamines decrease the permeability of the vessels, and it opens airways. So every just to mention this, every time you get exposed, more mast cells are formed. More of these mast cells with the antibodies are in the tissues. So with each exposure, the symptoms increase. So with each exposure, symptoms get more severe. So the first time, you probably might not have, much at all, if any. The second exposure, you'll have some symptoms, may not quite get to anaphylaxis. The third time it might, who knows, but eventually it'll get to where it would be dangerous for you to be exposed to that particular allergen. And I think that's it for that. So next we'll talk about type 2.